Hey everybody, it's your pal Jason. We have a very special This Week in Startups for you this week. We taped live at the Digital Family Summit here in Los Angeles. I wanted to take a moment before you watch this great episode, or listen to it if you're doing that kind of thing at the poker table, listening to the old twist. Thank the sponsors. Got to thank the sponsors for the show. Really appreciate the support of DNA Mail. DNA Mail. Everybody loves DNA Mail. Don't be an idiot. Don't have an IT department at your startup company. Just outsource that stuff so you can focus on your product. They will focus on your email servers. They will focus on your Exchange server, your Google app server. Go to DNA Mail, use DNA Mail, and get back to work. Also, WebSpy. WebSpy lets you see what traffic's going on in your network. You need good analytics to know what's going on. Go check out WebSpy. Great company. And also Ustream. Ustream, we stream using Ustream. Ustream, iStream, we all use Stream for Ustream. They crushed it at TechCrunch 50. They do a great job, and I love using them. I use them on a pretty regular basis. The best streaming company out there, period. And of course, Audible. Everybody loves Audible. You can go get a special twist deal by going to audiblepodcast.com/TWIST. That's audiblepodcast, not plural, .com/TWIST. And you'll get a whole bunch of books. You can do your homework, and Audible's awesome. When I play poker, when I'm down 2 Gs, when I'm up 3 Gs, you know what I'm doing? I'm not on tilt because I'm listening to a great podcast, a great audio book. It takes me off tilt. I can focus. I can learn. I don't have any of that downtime. You know, I don't want downtime. When I'm on the treadmill, when I'm in my car, I want to listen to an audio book. So thanks to our sponsors. You know it's your job as a listener to this show to thank at DNA Mail, at Ustream, at WebSpy, and at Audible_COM on Twitter and your Facebook. Thank them for supporting the show. This show is brought to you by them. You wouldn't get all this great content for free if it wasn't for those great sponsors. I love those sponsors. Okay, we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups. I hope you enjoy the show. Peace.
With this time, I go for mine. I get to shine. Now throw your hands up in the sky. Go for mine. I get to shine. Now throw your hands up in the sky.
So thanks for having us. And I thought we'd just have a simple conversation, a little bit about startups and community, since that was the topic of the evening. You're now at MySpace.
I am.
After running Userplane and selling it to AOL, you have like 24 people at Userplane?
Yeah, maybe
like 20 people.
20, 30, 40.
Right.
Yeah.
And then at some point, our old boss, John Miller, calls you and says, how would you like to have 1,000 employees or 1,500, I think, at MySpace?
Yeah, we didn't go over the number in the conversation, but he was excited about bringing me on as a team to help change some of the destination of MySpace.
And so most people would say, gosh, you're an entrepreneur, you sold your last company, you did very well, you got your whole life in front of you, and now you're going to go to MySpace, which some would argue is on a downward trend, flat trend, tons of challenges, this huge community that I guess we'll get into why maybe it stalled a little bit, but just take me through your thinking of why you would take on such a challenge. It sounds to me like, you know, a couple of years of pain.
It could be a couple of years of pain. I mean, in between Userplane and MySpace, I ran a company called Savo that was a 100 and so person company with offices here in LA and up in Canada, and we built an operation here in LA, and that taught me a lot about content, and I really enjoyed that mission. And that was a company that was already up and running that I took over and I started building. I think with MySpace, it was too interesting of an opportunity, right? You've got this massive community, millions, hundreds of millions of users, based in LA with a massive staff that hadn't really innovated in quite a while. You had a whole new management team coming in, a ton of support from News Corp. It just felt like a really interesting challenge to take on.
Peter, when they called you, you said you wouldn't take the job. Why not?
You know, I thought about it for a long time, and then I thought it was in LA, and you were just perfectly cast.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Much better. When we look back on MySpace, which if we were sitting here 5 years ago or 4 years ago, even 3 years ago, I mean, people would be saying just 3 years ago, MySpace was going to take over the world. It was unstoppable. The curve was like this. What, in your estimation, has changed in such a short period of time? I mean, we're talking about 24 months, 36 months. and obviously, Mike, I want to get your feedback on this as well, but how does it go from being the unstoppable juggernaut community that is going to take over the planet, Rupert Murdoch's bought it, this is this incredible purchase, to, oh my God, it's going to die? I mean, I know people are hyperbolic in the press, but, you know, and it's obviously wasn't going to take over the world, wasn't going to die, but how did it get so messed up in your estimation? Are people just transient going from these things through
Well, so you know,
networks?
it's one thing you could say is no one service has a claim on people forever, but the more interesting thing is kind of all the social stuff we talk about is maybe 5 or 6 years old. I mean, if you think about it, it all got built in the ashes of the last crash, like 2002, 2003. Flickr and Technorati and Blogger all kind of came up. So the stuff is incredibly new. And it's interesting how the nature of the medium, and therefore what it's useful for to people, has morphed so quickly. So I think a lot of it is, it's easy for a company, and even a startup, to get caught in orthodoxy.
Right.
MySpace had a formula, it worked well. Those particular sets of folks knew what they were doing and how they were communicating and blinking out pages and relating to an audience. And then the idea for Facebook moved into that space, if not by accident, but very cleverly. You know, it's like that feature set was an amazing, useful directory and communications utility that worked for an ever larger audience. From a marketing point of view, it was very clever that you know, it kind of started with the most prestigious colleges, then everybody wanted it, then high school people needed it. So there
was a good rollout.
Yeah, and it was it was kind of an ideal way of going after an audience. But I think the interesting thing is every day you get up, and you know, the things that are the most powerful feature sets and the things that lots of people go after and changes how they work are not predictable the day before. I mean, if you read anything about Twitter, any writer who writes about it, the first thing they'll say is, this is the most unlikely thing in the world, you know, that 140 characters will be. And then you get into the nuances of it. So I think it's that bit of how media evolve really quickly and how you keep up with it that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I think your point is it a cyclical question is a really important one, and one that I think about often. I think the best part about social networks or any kind of web property you build that's built on social viral distribution is that there's this beautiful virtuous cycle of growth, and then on the other hand, there's a beautiful vicious cycle of people transitioning out of that system.
Right.
And then the question comes to, well, are people just going to use these networks to a certain point, then jump to that next network? Does the network's value to them dilute over time as their circles and as their friend groups change and grow, or constrict? And you know, we do a lot of thinking about that, and I think MySpace, you know, went through that huge vicious and virtuous cycle, and Facebook's going through it now, and Twitter's going to go through it, and there's going to be other contenders. But what it does show you is that large behemoths, you can turn those tides really, really quickly, which from an economic point of view of just like the size of large internet companies that are relying on social distribution, I think that's actually a big question in their business model.
And was it a simple function of the feature sets stopped evolving rapidly at MySpace? Because that's what it felt like to me. I felt like I'm into MySpace, okay, I'm adding people, great, that's one function. Okay, I'm sharing photos, great, I'm updating my status, great, commenting, and then it was like, what now?
Right.
And then Facebook came out, I was like, oh, well, here's what's now, applications. Here's all these, you know, poke people, do this, you know, and it seemed like they just innovated and had more developers,
right,
which then leads people to say, well, is it because the company's located in Los Angeles and it's not developer-centric, it's media-centric?
Right.
And did Facebook out-develop MySpace?
I think that's a really reasonable question. There's no doubt that as any company scales to a certain size of 1,000+ employees, substantial revenue pressures, a parent company that has certain needs with the business, as well as just the general pressure of having a large public company of saying there's now lawsuits, there's other considerations that have to play into the factors of building product and what innovation means, you see a slowdown in development cycles, innovation, and because you now have the pressures of scaling, right, which become very real at certain size, that it prohibits a certain amount of growth within the business. And I think MySpace, just like any of these businesses, AOL, Yahoo, anyone, hit a certain point where innovation becomes harder and harder to do, right? And MySpace hit that point, Facebook's going to hit, all these groups will hit this point when they hit certain sizes. And then I think the question is, how do you reinvent that company and reinvigorate innovation within that organization so that it can continue to grow? And that's actually what we're kind of in the middle of right now.
So how much of that is just a management sense of, people get used to their systems and they can't conceive of innovations. You actually have to change the culture. And how much of it was, well, it just happened to be that the stuff we were built on was really, really difficult and we had to go do things very differently.
I mean, I think there's no doubt that there's always going to be challenges around a platform. Because up front, you would never take the right amount of time to actually build out a platform that could scale to 100 million+ users a month. because it would take you a very, very long time and very expensive from a capital perspective.
Right.
Right? And then second to that is, so you say, no matter what, you're always going to go through platform innovation. And at some point, you have to pay off the technical debt. Right? Like you're always going to accumulate technical debt. At some point, you got to pay it off. When you pay it off, you're taking valuable resources and putting them on problems that don't necessarily create forward-facing, feature innovation, but creates a platform for innovation in the future. Which is, we've been paying off a lot of technical debt. I'm at a point now where I'm very excited about where MySpace goes, because I can say, you know what, there's a lot we can do now that we weren't able to do in the past because of this technical debt being paid off. Now, better planning, better management, better strategy, better teams, better cycles, maybe you can, I think you can relieve certain pressures, but these companies grow extremely quickly, right? I mean, Twitter is down frequently, right? You look at the scale and speed of these developments, and at the end of the day, it's hard to predict and make sure that you're completely staffed appropriately. And
even Facebook, I have a problem sometimes logging in and it times out.
Exactly, it happens all the time, right?
One of the interesting things that all of this has done is it has increased the pace of innovation that everybody has to keep up with. And in a way, it changes a lot of our view of what that looks like. I'll give you an example on a large company perspective, similar that I'm working with. I've been doing a lot of work with Best Buy that has been very smart about a lot of the social things that they're doing. So a year ago, it occurred to them that they could take an awful lot of their internal services and just turn them into APIs so that there would be external innovation. And they had more of the Facebook or the App Store model in. And actually what happened was, before the rest of the world started building apps, all of their internal IT groups looked at this and said, oh, we're no longer just beholden to the big commerce platform we have. We can do all sorts of things and experiment and get things out. And it was like a weight was lifted off a bunch of people. Instead of being, well, we're traditional IT, you have an idea, you can experiment just like startups do. And the most interesting people in that company, to me, you go and talk to them and they look indistinguishable from the kind of employees you see in startups. They have an idea, they do it, they put the service out, the public comments on it, they go mess with it. And that kind of innovation I find very interesting going on in big companies.
I think that's the most fundamental shift right now for startups, is that you can build an incredible video experience all on APIs and never host a single video. Right? You can create an insane photos solution that you never have to host a photo. I mean, we have obviously I'm a big pioneer of APIs. Userplane was an API-driven business. But I mean, MySpace ID, we've been pushing a ton down there. I'm seeing people that are recreating substantial portions of the MySpace experience outside of MySpace through pure APIs, where we're bearing the weight of data, transmission, etc. But they're able to layer whole new experiences on top of a MySpace on-site or even off-site experiences. Facebook Connect's doing this. This open API layer is incredible, and Twitter is just the poster child of this, right? You see innovation in consuming Twitter data through solutions that Twitter isn't actually putting resources or development behind.
And probably 90% of the code written around Twitter was written outside of their offices.
Incredible.
Which is pretty unprecedented. Might be 99% of it. Why has Twitter, in your estimation, Peter, just taken off in such a huge way, even amongst celebrities who generally don't, they had their MySpace pages. I guess they got into it a little bit, but why are celebrities and so many people going on tilt about this product? Why is it so pervasive? And Facebook hasn't even reached this point in culture where it's so integrated into every conversation, where a news story or entertainment or a movie or television shows, everything is sort of keying off of Twitter. I don't know, when's the last time we saw this in technology?
So AOL.
AOL, right.
So one of the interesting things about, say, Twitter versus the blogosphere is that Twitter is the brand and the entire ecosystems around that. So when the blogosphere got started, there was RSS and there was kind of some ideas, and then you had 4 or 5 blog platform companies like Blogger and 6 Apart, and then you had a few search engines, then you had ad networks. So there was nobody in the middle who was the core. We were kind of all doing things with a set of standards. Twitter came out with this service, nothing's competing with it, and everything's building an ecosystem on it. So just what's amazing, and then you find that it so serves media companies, because there are a number, and I find Twitter interesting because you start looking at it in terms of the major use cases. So one is, it's the world's most lovely distribution system for anything else you're doing, far better than RSS, and it's worked itself into that if you're CNN, you better own everybody that says CNN, and it's a great way of getting stuff out. So you suddenly have every media company having to use it. Celebrities hop on it because it's a very fast way of building this stuff up. And the real-time thing is very interesting. I remember at Technorati, and so this is what, 2004, the presidential elections. Dave Sifry, who was our founder, was invited by CNN to be part of the broadcast team because blogging was important then. So what happened is someone would give a speech on the floor at the convention, and they'd cut to David, and they'd go, "What did the bloggers say?" And he'd go, "They haven't written their post yet.
Yeah, they're not finished."
Ariana's having a cocktail. We'll get back to you," which was very dissatisfying to TV. That's been solved. The fact that you're able to tune into something that's real time is very attractive, very, very, very addictive. And I think the minimalism thing of it, I mean, just the fact that there's so little.
That seems to me to be a key point to it. I mean, people who couldn't form a paragraph or an essay, which blogging was really about, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs, which, let's face it, not everybody is a great writer, especially celebrities. I mean, some of those people can't even put together a full sentence. So Twitter is perfectly suited. You just put 10 words together and it almost makes sense.
There's a behavior, though, with Twitter that I think you actually exemplify perfectly, Jason, which is that at some point in your career, you started Silicon Alley Insider, right? And
Reporter,
that was your tool for broadcasting.
Sure.
And at some point, you also probably had a massive email distribution system
Sure.
you used to basically, and that took you time, right? You compiled an email and you had all the solution set up, and then you moved to a blog platform, which is maybe a little bit easier, and then you have an audience coming to you, and now you have this very, very simple way for you to maintain a relationship with your audience, which is Twitter, right? That requires very little time. It's acceptable to be broken English with horrible, spelling and language, etc. It forces you to concise your thoughts down to a very small text entry field. You don't have to put a lot of time behind the planning.
Yeah.
So your ease of broadcasting, communicating to that audience is so important, and that's what's driving Twitter, right? Is you have a world where you have a small segment of social leaders, and they have a very simple way to communicate to their audience through Twitter. Twitter's replacing tools that were there in the past, but it's the same behavior that's been there for a long time.
It seems like it's taking about a third of email away, because I always look at my email box and go, you know what, this is something I'd rather broadcast to the whole company.
Right.
Maybe I'll CC everybody, or actually I wouldn't mind if everybody heard this. This is a good email. That's what I used to do. I used to post emails to my blog. It's one of my best blog posts. I know you guys probably want to ask some questions, so I think we have a hashtag on Twitter. And so if you use the hashtag #DFS09, is that correct? DFS09? So if you have a question for our guys here, go ahead and do that, and I'm going to read the questions coming in. I don't see any yet. I'm trying to see if anybody's saying anything really interesting. No, nothing too interesting. A lot of tweets, but none of these are. Yep, no. I tried. How many people here were on Rise? Does anybody even know what Rise is? Surprising, actually. There's people who know what that is. And then how many people here logged into MySpace in the last month? MySpace in the last month? Surprising good number. That's almost a third or half. And Facebook in the last week. Okay, so a little bit of work ahead of you, but that's the challenge. And I noticed that you've actually gotten some features done. I was on the site for the first time in a while and was pleasantly surprised that Twitter integration was working. The site was fast. And like commenting in your news sort of thread was actually working, and had people on it, and I was like, oh my God, look at some of my people are actually using this. Is this like this past week the first time you guys have done some like sort of public-facing product stuff? It seems to me like the first time it's come up on my radar.
Yeah, and the Twitter one's obviously right in the zeitgeist right now. There's been features. We put out a huge mail release. We put out instant messaging, but Twitter's the first one where we're starting to kind of reach out to external networks and bring some of the core audience back, which is fantastic. The product in general, even before I started there, I was an early MySpace adopter because they actually used Userplane early on. The product has evolved quite a bit over the years, but since there's been competitive products, people have shifted some of their behaviors. You start going back to MySpace, you're like, oh well, it's actually different than I remember it. But I'll tell you, give us a few more months, it's going to be drastically different than it is today, right? So we're in now a phase of innovation, and for the first 3 months of my tenure there, we spent a lot of time relieving that technical debt. So we reduced page load time by 60%, which for a site of MySpace's scale,
it's huge.
It's like we're at 15,000 plus servers, right? So it's like these are massive changes for us.
That was the first thing I noticed, was it actually was fast. What do you think will be the big win for you guys? I was speculating early on that maybe games would be a big win, and I know Zynga is doing gangbusters on poker, both on Facebook and on MySpace. what's the future of MySpace? Is it going back to its roots in music? Is it going ahead into social gaming and virtual currency? Is it going to be a content company? Do you see it being a publishing company?
Right.
What's your vision?
I mean, I think there's a larger vision that obviously I work with Owen and John, and even Rupert gets involved in, which is great. But I think what I can say is, like, games is very interesting to us. Music is obviously very interesting. We're highly invested into music. The iLike acquisition will be a pivotal acquisition for us that'll put a lot of weight even further behind our kind of music footprint. I think content becomes interesting. I don't think I'm that interested in us becoming the internal publisher of content. I think aggregating content's very interesting, right? So I think there's a bunch of things you'll be able to consume there. I think as far as MySpace goes, my goal isn't necessarily that people go to MySpace and they start, specifically using this as a closed communication tool, right? I'm interested in MySpace as much more of a public network, right? Where people typically publishing things on MySpace are very, very public about them, which is why it does draw in musicians and artists and people with large fan bases. So I think we'll continue down that line. I think it's a bit younger demographic than other tools like Facebook, et cetera, which I think we're still very strong in and growing really nicely. So, but it'll continue to evolve. It'll definitely have more of an entertainment focus than a pure internal communications focus, though.
Peter, how do these communities, you hear a lot of people raise money, I'm starting a community about film, I'm starting a community about music. How do you get from your 10 friends to the 10,000? How does it make that first jump? What advice can you give people when you're consulting with startups? How do you get from beyond the people in the office and their 10 friends to the sort of whatever the first plateau or tipping point is? What's your advice there?
So I think a lot of this is mentality, because we're coming from site as destination to increasingly site as a hub for syndication and a hub for serving people. So the question I keep asking is, how can you serve an audience and give people the things that they want to use to replicate and to keep sharing? When I was talking to, it was actually a internal startup in a large company that's launching something soon, and they were totally concerned with how many people were going to post a certain kind of content at their site, and all I could think about is, well, in order to command their attention, what can you give away to them that becomes irresistible? Or how can you do something new in the ecosystem where it becomes very important to them? So I think it's very easy to get focused on yourself, and this social economy is very much about giving stuff away that let people express themselves and grow. And so, I learn the most when I go talk to users and I start thinking about that kind of stuff. And that's what I think leads to more of the viral kind of activity.
That's something that most companies don't do. They don't actually bring their customers in and do labs, listening labs, or talk to them. Is that something you do with startup companies, actually go find their customers, or is this something that MySpace does? Do you bring in a bunch of 15-year-olds for a focus group and say, hey, what do you think of the product? What do you like?
We have both, traditional methods of looking at that. We also use products like ClickTail that basically help you kind of see user session trending and behaviors on site. I think the hard part about communities specifically is that there's so many different behaviors that exist inside those communities. You can definitely break down to certain classifications of behaviors, but it's hard to say that we've got the solution for this exact audience, because when you start looking at the makeup of these audiences, they're massive and they often have different needs.
Right.
I mean, the nice thing about something focused, of course, you can go talk to these people. So, you think about, for example, mommy bloggers or food bloggers. I mean, this is a group of people with opinion leaders who know what they like. You can watch their behaviors, and through some combination of you'd be amazed how many people think about a community and don't read their stuff all day long. And people love to be asked, right? I mean, so I think the ease with which today you can look at a target community and really pay a lot of attention to them is great. Just together also with the fact that it's awfully easy to prototype and test stuff now.
Yeah, and it feels like people are almost scared of their own users. What about Foursquare? I mean, this is an application that I'm sure you guys have both played. Have you played with it?
A bit.
Foursquare, a little bit. I mean, it's wildly addicting if you use it, but in some ways it has no value. It's, but like a lot of things online. Has anybody here used Foursquare? Any Foursquare users? Oh, this is a decent amount. So, you take out your phone and you say, I am here at, what's the name of this place? Volcano? Mm-hmm. Volcano? I'm at Volcano, and it's, your friends know you're at Volcano, which I guess you could do through a Twitter update, but
right.
It sort of rewards you for being in that space.
I think that reward is critical, though, right? There's a lot of solutions out there that are say, I am here now.
Right.
I think the difference is that, Foursquare is actually rewarding people as being social leaders, or is it kind of like city or town leaders?
You become the mayor.
Exactly. So, and I think when my friends that use Foursquare often are doing it because they feel rewarded when they become the mayor of their kind of local area, right? They start owning those regions. And
so it's recognition is
it's game theory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's playing with a currency to encourage behavior, and it's effective. I think they're showing that it's very effective.
Let's take a question from the audience. Dave LaFontaine. Yeah, there's Dave. Is that Dave LaFontaine? Right? Okay, Dave LaFontaine says, when does social media hit the too big to succeed point, i.e. nobody goes there, it's too crowded? That's a really fascinating question. Is it when these things get too big, do people go, you know what, it's not really cool anymore, it's too crowded, too much noise? What's the breaking point in these communities, and how do you avoid it? You see that on mailing lists a lot, right? I mean,
yeah, so one of the interesting things is how quickly we've moved from social media being something new to actually pervasively impacting most parts of society and almost becoming establishment. So, you think about the fact that the management's being very much challenged by the fact that people in a bottoms-up way can communicate, go around hierarchy, and it's fundamentally helping people take out middle management. I mean, as large an organization as the CIA fundamentally realized that 9/11 happened because of no Facebook, because there was this rigid communications up and down through email, but people couldn't serendipitously find each other. So part of it is, I think on a broad level, there's so much adoption that you end up with things like people looking at Facebook and saying it's too mainstream. So kind of from the perspective of maybe new communities, you have that problem. And then I think the other issue here is the abuse or the gaming of the system is the other thing that comes in. So, email comes in and then spam follows.
Right.
And then, this year, we're just beginning to see what Twitter spam looks like. So, for example, if anyone was paying attention to your hashtag, we could be, for all I know, being spammed right now trying to sell us, courses on Twitter because they found this stuff out. So I think there's this continual cat and mouse in how you take any of these medium and do the signal to noise, right? I mean, there was a particular year in Technorati that spam blogs were huge, and that was the big focus. So there's a huge amount of innovation that I think always has to be on signal to noise or search or making things useful or recapturing community, because the forces of exploiting stuff, that's
it's almost just protecting the community from these sort of bad actors. I mean, blogging certainly became, just commenting on blogs seemed like it was destroyed over a couple of years. I know at Weblogs Inc. it was, what do we do? I mean, there's just so many bad actors posting, horrible stuff in the comments that it's almost, we should turn off comments. It's very hard to resolve these issues. I mean, MySpace had some spam issues. It doesn't seem to be so bad anymore.
Yeah, I mean, a ton of technology thrown at that problem, right? And I mean, Jason Hirschberg's our kind of head of product, and he spends a lot of time basically focused on making sure that user experience is curated and tight, because you're right, if you get overexposed, right, or you just have, suddenly people feel like they're one of a mass and there's all this garbage flowing through the system, then suddenly you lose interest. And MySpace definitely had that challenge early on, through working both with government agencies and also a huge amount of intelligence-driven technology. They've done a great job at filtering out the crap in the stream and pulling back on all the spam that was hitting the systems. And now I feel like we have actually a much cleaner experience than we ever had in the past.
Let's take another question from the audience. Michael Tejada? Are you here? Are you watching the stream? No? Okay, so I'm watching the stream. He says, what are some of the key action steps to make your startup go viral? I mean, that's sort of like asking how to, get lightning to strike somewhere, isn't it? Can you actually figure out like a viral technique? Can you break it down to make it explode? Did you do that at Userplane? Were there techniques?
I mean, we definitely had, and Userplane was a bit more of a back-end technology. Savo definitely focused on consumer-grade traffic. I mean, I think that there's definitely tactics to driving traffic, right? And there's tactics to encouraging sharing, and there's tactics to just generally growing audiences in marketing, right? And this is a new degree of marketing than anything that's probably been looked at as marketing in the past. I think viral is definitely a portion of marketing. It's probably not good to go through a list of these tactics like on a show, but I mean, I think there are kind of general rule sets you can follow, but when you talk about getting the mass to truly adopt, I mean, it's a question of how do you become into the zeitgeist of the United States, right? Yeah. How do you become a cultural phenomenon? That's a much different question.
Well, and in a lot of cases, before you get to mass, there are actually like segments to focus on. So one of the great things about, I was talking to someone who's in the audience tonight that's working on a really interesting site, and by the nature of it, it's going to start locally. So, suddenly you start realizing that, there are local influencers, and, there's a way of making a really big impact in a small space, and then you get known. One of the classic books on high-tech marketing, which is, I think, Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, talks about the bowling pin strategy, which is, you need to, you knock down one and then you knock down the other. So you have to be ruthlessly focused on some community that goes nuts. I mean, you guys were focused on music early on.
Right.
MySpace didn't talk to everyone. They ignited a music community in LA that did something no one else did. People got what they did and they took off. And Twitter has been amazingly successful in a celebrity use case, a conference use case, a political use case. I mean, there are these certain use cases that people got, and then then my mom was like, what? She kind of like it got into her psyche. So I think you can't lose sight of the fact that when you're starting something, you have to just deeply know that community, and it's kind of all related. So if you're focusing on a startup for people who are in the film community, there's a real kinship between understanding them, listening to them, looking at all their feedback, and then really serving them to get started. Because if you get a few people really talking about it, you can kindle from that. It's really tough to set a redwood on fire with a match, but if you put kindling in the way, you can get it from there. I think a lot of people miss that thing in marketing.
Yeah, and I think one of the best examples I've seen is Yelp. I mean, they started in a very specific geographic location with a very specific vertical. Restaurants in San Francisco, not even like San Jose, like this is going to be San Francisco. And then they launched, I guess, Yelp, is it Yelp Elite? Yelp Elite, right? Any Yelp Elite members in the audience? There's one, two, good. I have my friend's restaurant, if you could review it, that'd be great. Where they would let, I guess, certain members of the community come to certain dinners and tasting, and actually married the offline world and online world. And
There's a lot of social engineering there. I mean, this gets to, if you think about the DNA that you're playing with here, game theory is a big part of the DNA, because this is no longer just a communications medium. There's play and there's reward and there's all this stuff, and that stuff is clearly understood. Throwing the attention on someone else and rewarding them, not just in a game theory, but attention, like figuring out, at Technorati it was authority, and in Twitter it's who's following you, but these mechanisms that I mean, the best thing is, you create something that people want to keep doing because they get credit out of it. There was a friend of mine has a startup in San Diego that they want to build campaigns for brands. So the idea is, if Mariah Carey has a fragrance coming out, you're building a dress for her. So they, it's a classic little user-generated thing. But what they built for their users was a dashboard that gave them feedback. So the users, by the way, are like 13 and 14-year-old kids. But you saw that if you made this piece of content, they looked at IP addresses, where in the world your content was used. Well, if your friend's stuff was showing up all over Europe, the United States, you'd spend the next 4 hours getting friends to take your content in more places so you could beat him. So because they gave you the data and the feedback, you started acting like little CMO, and you stopped everything else and basically went to work for that startup to get more links for everybody. And then I think they also gave you a similar graph where you saw, which social network was your stuff showing up on by numbers compared to everyone else. And so they basically programmed their audience to go to work for them because it was in their interest.
Which seems to be part of the whole, how often am I retweeted, how many followers do I have versus how many people am I following. I mean, just that little statistic has put so many people on tilt to use the system and get more followers, and people ask other people, would you follow me? I mean, it's a very bizarre behavior to ask other people to follow you.
Social networks built very similar, like how many friends do you have, right? That was a motivating factor at the beginning of these.
I can't understand those people asking people to follow them. By the way, I'm just Jason. It's just 5 characters, Jason on Twitter. So let's talk about virtual currency. This is something that I don't think a lot of us Americans appreciate so much, but I've spent a decent amount of time in Asia and Korea, Japan, China. This is a multi-billion-dollar business already, and here with Zynga and what they're doing in virtual currency and World of Warcraft, it seems to actually be an entirely new revenue stream. And we talk about the internet, are you e-commerce, are you advertising, are you subscription? I mean, we had just a couple of buckets, and now this new bucket here. Is this going to work here? Is it something like, are we going to see MySpace coins at some, I mean, I keep asking you questions like you're a startup company and I forget that you work for a big publicly traded company. I can't do this anymore. But talk generally about virtual currencies without telling me if there's going to be a MySpace currency.
I mean, well, I think virtual currencies are really interesting. I think you're right, like especially in the gaming community, be it, poker-oriented gaming community or whether it's a Zynga-powered game or a Playdom-powered game, I think virtual currencies are really interesting. I think, on a bigger picture, you'd say there's, content in the world is not free. There's some cost to content. we're getting to a point where in certain cases, content costs cannot be supported by a pure online advertising model. And
Sure.
thus, like, we're at a point of saying, well, do you go subscription or do you go something else? And right now, virtual currency is looking like that next thing. I think it's retraining an audience, maybe the audience in the United States, saying there's going to be situations where we're going to give you enough value that you're going to be willing to pay us pennies for something. And then I think there's this other question of like, well, who provides that infrastructure for those pennies? Because obviously putting in your credit card for a penny transaction isn't really realistic. So is there a currency that gets created that can be shared among a whole series of publishers? How do the credit cards get involved in here? So I think there's a world coming there. I think it's a world that's going to be slow to adopt. I think it's going to take time. There's definitely sites that I use all the time that I'd be happy to pay for, and there's sites that I use all the time that I probably wouldn't be. But I think at the end of the day, we will see it as a new revenue stream. I think it should play into everyone's thinking, but I'm really curious to see how the infrastructure plays out on who owns it.
Yeah.
I got a question for you. So, culturally, this is a really interesting thing because, I mean, you could use it to pay for content. In the Second Life sense, you're not using it, I mean, I guess building out your space is content, but it's really a way of expressing yourself.
Environment,
so
expression.
It's less buying someone else's content, it's more the right to paint and create and express yourself. So as you look at other cultures, where do you see the real adoption of this stuff? And by the way, that's a very different thing than virtual poker chips, which is
Right.
like a different case entirely.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think if you look at Cyworld in Korea, they make $60 million a year off of people just buying MP3s to put on their essentially MySpace pages. And a lot of the popular news services and social networks in Japan, and there's two of them that are publicly traded. I think the largest one is Mixi, M-I-X-I, and I met with them when I was in Japan. 80-90% of their activity is mobile, maybe 90%, and majority of their revenue is virtual currency. And people do things like, I would buy you a gift, or I change my avatar, or I pay for micropayments for news. And it's almost like it's micropayments 2.0, which is, I'm going to buy a bucket of coins, and I don't feel so bad splashing, a little splashy, cashy, a couple of coins here, a couple of coins there. It sort of makes it into a game, and that whole cognitive dissonance of, is this worth it or not? That whole psychological overhead that we have when we want to make a purchase.
Yeah.
Oh, you're charging me $4 for this Coca-Cola at the movie theater, $7 in the club, 99 cents at a beverage store, and 15 cents at Ralph's. That psychological terror that we go through when just buying a soda goes away when it's just like, oh, 4 coins. Fuck it. 4 coins. I'm good.
Right.
I mean, it's interesting to me in a similar vein that the iPhone App Store, I mean, in addition to just it's a successful platform, we just came off of 10 years of the web where you wouldn't pay for any kind of content.
Sure.
And, well, we paid for ringtones, but, one didn't know going into it would the apps be free or not, but it's clearly there's something about a delight you get under a certain amount of dollar value that you have no problem.
It seems like
that.
a pricing issue. I mean, when it comes down to it, 99 cents a song seems palatable, $15 for an album doesn't to a lot of people, and so the problem seems to be
And
solved.
the ease of integration, right? The Kindle is the exact example as well, right? You have a simple methodology now for buying digital content through, Amazon that's in essence like using a virtual currency type platform.
Yeah, it just makes it easy, psychologically easy. So question, how long are we supposed to go for? Nobody told me. Are we like 10 minutes over, 50? You guys, I think we can finish this up in just 90 minutes. Is that about 90?
I got a question.
Yes.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
So you just had your TechCrunch 50.
TechCrunch 50, yep.
You were around a number of startups.
A lot.
In a kind of a very funky economic year.
Yep.
So when we were preparing for this whole thing, since I hadn't actually been over there,
Yep.
I was very curious about what were the trends? What did you see that you liked? What did you go like this about?
Yeah, that's a great question. We had 700 people apply this year. It's a very difficult application process. You have to actually make a video, like where you pitch Mike Arrington and I on like, hey, here's our startup, here's what we do, screencast. So it's hard, and so that was a large number of people still applying. We sold the event out, so it still did fine economically. But the companies were different. The companies were a smaller number of people spending less money, but producing extraordinary things for very small amounts of money, because when you apply, you have to tell us how much you've raised and how much you've spent and all this stuff. And it seemed like there was a whole class of entrepreneurs spending $50,000 or $25,000 and getting what looked like, just in the Web 2.0 era, which, when we did our companies, like that, it feels like a decade ago, because this is what people did with $4 million. These people are doing with, or $1 million, $25,000, $50,000. And I think it relates back to the API question, which is, there's so much common infrastructure now that you would never go get a bunch of servers somewhere. You just, you go on Amazon and, well, I don't need to make login software. I'll just use Google and Facebook and MySpace Connect and Twitter login. And I don't need to get big, publishing software. I can just use Tumblr or whatever. I mean, it's almost like you can whip these things together so quickly. And the second thing was massive focus on building a business. And the first year of the conference, we saw a lot of people with features. The second year of the conference, we saw a lot of people making products, and then this year, people we're building a business. Here's the business. This is the features of this product. Here are our clients. 2 people brought clients on stage. Actually, one of them is a LA-based company, which you all should be very proud of, City Sourced. I don't know if Curdy D is here and some of the other guys. These guys came in. It's an incredible story. They just had this. They came to my office. We had a company drop out of the 50. We got a slot open. We're looking for somebody. Somebody whispers in my ear, you guys see the City Source thing. Very simple. They take out an iPhone. They go, pretend this is graffiti. Take a picture. Send it to your politician in San Jose. And then here's the web interface. They see a map with all the graffiti in real time, XML feed. They can do whatever the hell they want with it, send it out to police. I was like, well, that's brilliant. Why doesn't that exist? And they're like, well, it does. We're making it. I said, you're in. I talked to Mike, and he said they're in. They went from like half a product to coming in the top 3 or 4 companies, a total crowd pleaser, and they brought one of their clients on stage, the San Jose guy who runs all the infrastructure there or whatever. So and other people signed contracts. So just people are focused on business, and I think it's a good thing to do.
I agree.
So I never. I mean, how many times have we been through this? Like, yeah, it gets too heavy, and then it crashes, and then it goes down, and then creative destruction. All the good things are built in the trough. So I never worry about it. All the good companies are built in the down markets because people have time on their hands. Yep. How many people are at a startup company? Show of hands. Great. So I mean, how many people are laid off? Need a job? Okay, guys at those companies, go talk to those company guys and get them a job, for the love of God.
One of the things I noticed right around the start of the Web 2 era, and this was basically right around when you could do mashups and there was Ajax, it's easier to do things, is it became increasingly difficult to distinguish between a startup and a mashup. You take services, you'd show something, but the barriers to entry were way down, the funding requirements were way down, and it challenges a lot of what we think about when we think of startups. I mean, the first thing is, you can build something, but the question is, are there barriers to entry? Is it enduring? And of course, if you're the VCs, these things require spectacularly less capital, so it challenges the model. Now we've gone even further. So did you run up against that with some of these things that you're looking at them? And
it's so interesting you bring that up. Somebody just asked the same exact question. Eggebahart, are you here? Anyway, she asked the same exact thing. Are people building features to be acquired by other companies? That was definitely a trend. I think that was actually maybe the signature of the Web 2.0 sort of movement was, we've got a set of new features, Ajax, whatever, things, maps, all this other kind of stuff, hosted video. Let's just build a couple of features, get to 1 million people and sell it to AOL. It worked for us. But, and now I think that's over because the tolerance of that from VCs and investors isn't there. They don't want to invest in that company. They want to invest in a company that says, we'll be sustainable. If there's no buyers in the market, it doesn't matter. We'll keep building. We'll be relentless.
The other difference is that now that companies are actually embracing APIs internally, they can now work with those external partners without having to acquire them, right? They can say, look, you want to build a new feature on top of our platform? Here's my APIs. Let's see what you do. If you like it, maybe we buy it, maybe we bring it in-house, right? So I think it's going to change versus people having to acquire these things to actually enable them to.
There's no BD person to go and make the call. Right. I mean, use it. If you like it, then we'll talk about a structure. Yep. I think it's a pretty dope way of doing it. But I'm very hopeful right now. I mean, how do you guys feel about the economy and the rebound and everything? Pretty hopeful, right?
I think it's great.
Yeah. So far, so good.
Quite a bit of M&A in the last few weeks, right?
And Google today said they're going to acquire a company a month, Eric Schmidt. That was the headline, at least. Huge.
So
let me thank, I think we'll wrap up because people should be drinking right now and eating. I should thank the sponsors of the event. If you put the sponsors up here, we'll thank them. And I'll thank the sponsors. Well, actually, here's a plug. Go see this film, We Live in Public. Has anybody seen We Live in Public yet? Anybody go to Sundance and see it? Good film, yes? Good film. Okay, so We Live in Public opens on Friday. It's a film about Josh Harris, who is the founder of Sudo.com It won Sundance. I'm in the film for about 30 seconds, which is fantastic. But it's a truly amazing film, and it's playing here, I think, at the New Art or one of the local theaters starting Friday. So go see that film. It's really cool. And thanks to ePoll, Wakano, NeoHire, Mashable, Social Approach, Freedom Speak, Social Tech, ITLA, whatever that is, I don't know, Annenberg, which I know that's a school, and yes, thank you, Causecast, Digital Media Wire, Witty, which is inspiring people apparently, Magnify 360, I don't know what that does either, it sounds cool, Social Radius sounds very cool, I think they made the video, Tube Filter, I know that's very cool, I've used that. And I think that's it, right? That's all the sponsors. Let me thank my guests, Mike and Peter. You guys were great. I hope it was very informative. You guys, let's give them a round of applause. I think they did well. Let's give a round of applause to the AV guys. I think they did a great job thinking on their feet. Well done. And let's give a big round of applause to Tony. Yes. Brad. Thank you guys. Come on out one more time. Brad and Tony.
With this